Hey guys, Montel here, and welcome to this edition of Let's Be Blunt with Montel. And you know, Let's Be Blunt has always been all about cannabis or hemp, anything about cannabis or hemp. Every single aspect of it, from the history to, its now current use and where it's developing. But we've also expanded Let's Be Blunt out to talk about some other things that I know you've heard about, and that's psychedelics. Psychedelics have really come into the mainstream in a way in science across the world in the last 5 or 6 years, though it's been around as long as cannabis has been around. We're now starting to see that, even the FDA has been authorizing various studies around the country because they've realized the viability of psychedelics as a possible, not antidote, but a treatment for everything from PTSD to severe headaches and lots of other things. And so I'm really excited about doing the show that we're going to do today because according to the published study titled The Use of Psychedelics in Treatment of Medical Conditions, an analysis of currently registered psychedelic studies in the American Drug Trial Registry, there has been a resurgence of psychedelic research that has broadly encompassed the fields of neuroimaging, psychopharmacology to psychology. Focused mostly on psilocybin and MDMA, researchers are now considering potential of these drugs being used to treat everything from, like I said, in psychiatry to neurological conditions such as addiction, pain, depression, end-of-life anxiety, and things like post-traumatic stress disorder. My guest today is an educator, an author, and entrepreneur who's focused on healing. His new book that's called Triumph Over Trauma, Psychedelic Medicines, are helping people heal their trauma, change their lives, and grow their spirituality. In this guide for psychedelics curious, in a guide for psychedelic curious, Dr. Ran Hansen, thank you so much for joining us today.
Montel, it is my pleasure to be here. I have followed your career for decades. I love that you have been in service to others basically your entire life, and I just want to shout that out and appreciate you for all the work you've done, especially for veterans.
Well, I also appreciate what you're doing right now because I do recognize that even things like ketamine have been helping a lot of our veterans across the country understand that there is an option for them. Some of them it may work for, some it may not, but the option is that using psychedelics has been shown to actually impact combat PTSD, something that I'm very, very much aware of because I work on a protocol that's called RTM, Reconsolidation of Traumatic Memories, created by Dr. Frank Bork. It's been around for about 10 years. Finally, this last year has been, designated evidentiary medicine, been selected by the ISTSS as one of the only cures for PTSD that's non-pharmaceutical or non-chemical. So, the area of PTSD I know very, very well. And I'm so psyched about the fact that for even those that RTM may not work for, psychedelics could work for them. But before we get into the conversation about psychedelics, so I'm psyched I want to talk about that. Let's talk about you. Give me a little bit about your background, sir.
I basically been an educator my entire life. That's sort of my self-identification, although this morning I was thinking about Johnny Appleseed and I was like, oh, maybe I should be a healing seed or something like that because that's kind of my passion, as you said in the introduction. I got into the wellness field about around 2000, and that became a passion of mine in looking at the food we eat. Not looking at diet per se, but more importantly, just how we eat and how we look at food. And then I started looking at exercise, the importance of exercise in our health, and then nature and the power of nature. And so all these different, I guess we'd call them holistic methods, but and I was more focused on health than on healing. And then really about 3 years ago, my wife and I were listening to a podcast with Jesse Gould, who is the founder of Heroic Hearts Project. It's a nonprofit helping veterans heal through PTS and moral injury and things of that nature. And I learned about psychedelics for the first time then. Of course, I had heard about LSD as a kid, as we all probably have in one way or another, or other psychedelics, but I had never knew of their healing potential. I'd always heard it from the just say no in the war on drugs, that all these medicines are bad, or all these sorry, we call them medicines, all these drugs are bad for us. And so I just stayed away from psychedelics. And then, hearing Jesse's story on this podcast, and then, just doing this deep dive into first ayahuasca, which I had never even heard of as a psychedelic, and then the whole field of psychedelics just transformed my thinking about things. And then Dr. Gabor Mate's work on healing and his focus on trauma, and we start looking at these epidemic that we have, angry outbursts and fear, and people, we have the highest percentage of people taking prescriptions, and all these things going on, that it just led me to this realization that we're kind of in this healing crisis in my mind. And
It seems
that
as if, let me just stop you just
yeah,
a
sure,
second.
yeah,
I want you to continue what you were talking about, because when you talk about we're in this healing crisis, it seems like the world is in this healing crisis, but
yeah,
led by the United States of America. I mean,
yeah,
there used to be a day where we were number one in a lot of things, but right now, the number ones that we can claim, are ours are things that disgust most people. I mean, we're number one in the world when it comes to gun death. We're number one in the world right now. I think we're jumped to number one in the world in suicide.
yep,
We are number one in the world in other forms of violence. When you're talking about outbursts and things, yeah, I think about yesterday, or in the last couple of days, a guy ran to a congressman's office with a baseball bat and just started swinging the bat. And now we find out that the guy has had mental illness for 20 years of his life. And people who knew that he had this mental illness and let him go, a certain amount of time without taking his medication. We are living in a time where, as much as we think, and I heard you when you distinguish between drugs and medicine, but let's also recognize that even psychedelics have been considered medicines for 5,000 years.
yep,
It's insane how now all of a sudden we think, oh well, there may be some value here, where the value was identified back in, back in the 1700s, back in
yeah,
the 1800s, back in the 1900s. I mean, we knew the value of psychedelics. That's the reason why the CIA and our government try to replicate them by making synthetic versions of natural psychedelics. So I'm sorry, I just wanted to throw that in for our listeners and our viewers who tune in, who don't really understand. Guys, you have to understand this. I'm not talking about medicine men. I'm not talking about, people in the jungles and off in the Amazon and off in other places. The world recognized value to psychedelics. So let's go two ways. One, you can go back, I think it's 3,000 years, 4,000 years. I've read so many different things.
yeah,
But in the last 300, we have utilized psychedelics more than people believe. Think about it for a second. And maybe, Doc, you might be able to echo this. If we go back to the mid 1600s, we in our 2023 minds don't remember, but back in the 1600s, they didn't have toilet paper. Hoo-hoo. They didn't have water to drink. What? Water everywhere, not a drop to drink? Yes, folks. If you go back to the 1600s, they learned that, if they took water and just drank it out of the stream, people were dying.
yeah,
But if they boiled it, or if they turned it into a low alcohol content drink, they would lessen the opportunity of getting some sort of intestinal, digestional viruses. So people walked around on this planet, 1600s, especially here in the United States of America, late 1600s, early 1700s. Come on now. I mean, people don't recognize the fact that this country wasn't built on tobacco. This country was built on hemp.
hemp,
And
yep,
that hemp that it was built on, people knew its medicinal and, psychological effects back then. You had to, come on now. How was it sleeping at night, 95 degrees with no air conditioning? Come on, man.
yeah, yeah,
Every time you ate a dinner, you had to go out into the bushes by yourself and grab a leaf. What? So then take that and extrapolate it to the fact that when we don't understand PTSD. We're just now starting to find and understand the mechanisms that cause PTSD, recognizing that it's not just something that's psychological, but it's something that's actually is cellularly changed in your amygdala. Okay, so people need to understand that this is something that makes changes in your brain. Back then, they didn't understand that, but they recognized that there were some herbs and things out there, and lick a toad, do some other things. If you licked it just a little bit, you might wake up the next morning feeling a little bit better. Nobody could explain why, but it was something that was gifted to them by the gods, supposedly, right?
Yeah. Wow. I have a million things I could reply to that, but you are 100% correct. Um, I sort of laugh. These medicines are being called, given breakthrough status right now by the FDA and others. But as you said, they've been used for centuries, at least the natural versions of these medicines. And so, and then even when we look back into the 1960s, there was all this research done on LSD and work with LSD and psilocybin. Therapists were using this in their therapy sessions, and it was doing wonders until, as you mentioned, the military and the CIA were like, "Oh, maybe we could use this for evil rather than good." And then they found out, no, the psychedelics are for good. um, but I also want to talk about. There's a great story in the book from this woman named Crystal who she works in the cannabis industry, and she said when she first started looking for a job and got a job in the cannabis industry, she became so angry because she had believed all the propaganda that she had learned in school about cannabis, all the evils of this tobacco, this marijuana. And she's in the book because she also did a psilocybin journey, which helped cure or helped her learn how to stop her alcohol abuse problem. And she also then discovered all the lies that had been told about psychedelics. And so part of this problem with this whole movement of healing with psychedelics is getting over these 50 years we've had of just say no, and the dare campaigns and the war on drugs. Most of us remember that fried egg commercial with, here's your brain on drugs. And to think that
Most of that funded by the tobacco and alcohol industry, by the way. But go right
yeah,
ahead.
yeah. And by the way, tobacco and alcohol deaths number annually in the US in about 600, 700,000 deaths per, annually, and psychedelics barely any deaths, and if they are any, it's typically from improper use. So again, just this crazy misappropriate mis organization of these medicines. We
And
have instead.
especially when you look at the fact that our pharmaceutical industry, who literally has gone berserk trying to create the strongest opioid that they can create,
Yep.
rather than just take advantage of things that naturally occur on the planet.
Yeah.
So again, I'm sorry I cut you off right while you were
It's okay.
explaining what got you interested in psychedelics to begin with.
It was. I've always had a passion for veterans. In the past, I did a lot of career counseling with them because of the typically you get off you rotate off, and then you're basically thrown into the civilian world without much training of how do you take your military work history and apply it to the civilian world. So I've always had a passion for them, and what got me into psychedelics and healing was Jesse Gould's story of that. He was an Army Ranger, did several tours, came back with PTS, depression, anxiety, and the VA basically said, here's some prescriptions you can take. He didn't want to do that. He was self-medicating with alcohol, which is a fairly typical story of almost anyone suffering with some of these mental health issues. And finally, through a military buddy, he heard of ayahuasca, had never he had never even done cannabis, let alone any other drugs, and went down to the jungle and found this amazing healing through this medicine. As you mentioned, you don't have to go to the jungle to do that. Psilocybin is a fantastic medicine that's in about 200 different mushroom varieties and grows almost all over the world. But what got me interested is this healing, and the amazing thing to me with these veterans, especially, they would go into this healing ceremony expecting to deal with the war trauma, and often on that first night, there was nothing about the war trauma at all. It was childhood trauma that they had forgotten, pushed down. We think we compartmentalize all these things in our lives that are negative, and all we really do is just lock them down until they explode in some way, as you mentioned, whether it's someone attacking someone in a Walmart parking lot, or going into a mall, or any number of different things, or sadly committing, taking their own lives. So that's what got me into this rabbit hole, and then just seeing, just as you mentioned, the pharmaceutical big pharma. Again, not to be too crazy, but in my mind, especially given that we're only one of two countries that allows so much pharmaceutical marketing to be taking place, it's an industry to keep us sick. We're taking prescriptions to
No,
manage symptoms.
no question. I mean,
Yeah,
I spoke to a couple of the doctors who have the same philosophy that we manage a sick care system in America, not
yeah,
a health care system. There's no question about that.
yeah,
I think that when you look at even look at PTSD or PTS, it's
yeah,
become a cottage industry, an
yeah,
industry that is 3, 4, 5 billion a year. People are breaking people over the coals for separate programs and things. Where now we recognize that there are things that can happen and ways people can approach that literally you can be relieved of your symptoms if through ketamine or through other forms of psychedelics and things like that in 2 to 3 sessions, and sometimes in one. Let's talk a little bit about the differences so those who are tuning in
sure.
who don't know what we're talking about. You mentioned ayahuasca. There's also psilocybin. There's also ketamine, right?
Yep, yep. Ketamine is the only quote unquote legal psychedelic right now. It's Schedule 3, but it's allowed to. There are ketamine clinics throughout the U.S. So yes, ketamine,
LSD,
LSD,
MDMA.
yep,
What
and
else?
ibogaine,
Okay, ibogaine. Yeah.
yep,
Let's talk about what they are individually. Let's go to ibogaine, ayahuasca, psilocybin. Those three. Those are all plant based, correct?
yes, yes,
Right, and they are naturally occurring plants in the world.
yes,
And I want people to understand that, one of the things that you all seem to bank on and think about is the fact that we thought that Albert Einstein was one of the greatest minds on the planet. Well, if you really believe that, well, remember, Albert said for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. So therefore, on this planet, nature gave us what we needed to cure
yes,
those things that cause the problems. However, we are too damn ignorant to understand that as we continue to rape the rainforest and we destroy plants all over the world, we probably just got rid of, in the last hour, since we started talking, we probably burned and destroyed 1,000 cures. I say that because, as we let the rainforest be raped in South America, they are indiscriminately just burning foliage that we've never even identified. You look at the Elon Musk of the world and all these billionaires that are trying their best to race themselves to Mars. They ain't a damn thing on Mars I'm going to get within 2 years. But there's stuff right here on the
yes,
planet. Why don't we
yes,
research the rainforest and start to figure out that there may be cures for every single illness that exists? Because
yes.
again, if you believe Albert, every action equal opposite reaction, illness, cure. Illness, cure. I'm just trying to say. So anyway, let's go back to, so we got the three plant-based versions of.
Yeah, and I just want to add, it's just so bizarre to me that a government, or many governments now, because they follow the U.S. lead, can outlaw a plant. Like, that's just bizarre. How do you even justify that? But we know it's all political, so we'll skip that. But so ibogaine, native to the African continent, used, as you mentioned earlier, for centuries by the indigenous peoples there. we're seeing that it is extremely effective for helping with opioid addiction, breaking that addiction. It's probably, in my mind, the most intense psychedelic. Most of the time, or the best practices for this is in a clinic where you have a heart monitor, blood pressure is checked, and doctor or medical staff is on hand, because it does, this medicine especially raises blood pressure, increases pressure on the heart, so you have to be physically uh, stable, physically well to take this medicine. And it's probably the longer lasting, some journeys, as we call them, uh, can last 24 to 36 hours on that medicine. So that's, again, and all these medicines, I should say up front too, these are not things that people want to take recreationally or for fun. I mean, ibogaine, if you hear the stories of these veterans, and again, a lot of veterans are go to ibogaine retreats. This is horrible, uh, painful. You're purging, you're getting rid of things, you're not sleeping, you're uh, having these experiences. So it's not like, oh yeah, I want to have a fun weekend away and do ibogaine. So I just want to make that clear that all these medicines are really truly helping people do the work of healing themselves. So
And and
good, yeah,
even though in the past, they weren't basically sanctioned by doctors,
right,
there were people who administered them even in the remote areas of the world.
yeah,
Ibogaine, as you talk about, when was administered as a healing substance, but also was used for several years. What 16 late 1600s,
yeah,
15 late 1500s, 1600s as a poison.
yeah,
So they used to also go to war and like dip, arrows in little ibogaine, because if you just nick somebody, you could send somebody off to, the oblivion just from that. So
yeah,
this is not something that we're not talking about something that we're suggesting that anybody who's tuned in listening to would do on their own.
right,
These should be all really managed with a guided therapist who can guide you through and carry on. And again, everybody's levels are a little different. So, hitting that precise amount, it's either a hit or a miss. I mean, you might take too much, and next thing you know, you're tripping for days, or you may take too little. And if that was the experience that you were looking for, you're not going to have it. However, there is and has been, they were showing some validity to micro dosing these things,
yeah,
right?
yep. And we can definitely get into that. And I just just lost my train of thought on something you
That's
just
all right.
said.
Well, we don't have to go. We don't have to go to microdosing right now. Let's still
Yeah, let's
kind of
go. Let's finish the thing. We'll come back to microdosing
sure.
for sure. Yeah. Um, so then ayahuasca. It's a combination of a root and the leaves of a shrub. Yeah, it's native to South America, and again used for centuries for healing. It's a community process where usually you are in a, oh, I know what I was going to say, we'll come back to that, usually in a group setting, 12, 15 people, and a shaman and a healer that's guiding that process. Again, I want to emphasize what you said, Montel, that so if you're after this podcast, you're interested in considering a psychedelic journey, then there are the legal best ways to do it. There are clinicaltrials.gov. There are clinical trials going on all across the country. So many universities are jumping on the psychedelic bandwagon. So you can go there and see if there's a clinical trial near you. There's also a website called retreats.guru, which lists retreat centers worldwide that are legal and have all these protocols in place, as you just mentioned. So, yeah, you want to have these safety protocols in
You
place.
don't want to go down to the local bodega and buy
Yep.
that bag of mushrooms there that says it's got psilocybin on it, microdose, and think you can do this on your own. You
Yeah.
can't. Don't be
Yeah.
an asshole. Don't be
Yep.
stupid. You know
Yep.
what I mean? Because and that's something that's also a little scary. But I want you to go ahead and continue to explain the differences so that our listeners will
Yeah.
hear and come back to that. But
Okay.
the fact that bodegas all over the Northeast are selling mushrooms right out of a bodega that says such a certain amount of psilocybin. This amount is a microdose. It's like I really I think that's like crazy dangerous.
Yeah. I 100% agree with that. I would not, especially with fentanyl being laced with everything, put in everything. I would never buy anything off the street, and that's, again, we can come back to that, but that's also one of the reasons we're trying to push for psychedelics to be rescheduled, because right now, as you know, whenever there's a war on anything, in this case, a war on drugs, the black market is such a detriment to lives, to uh, weapons, guns, all violence, all these things. So, but we'll come back to that. So ayahuasca, again, a pretty powerful brew. Um, Typically done, like I said, most of the retreat centers, legal retreat centers, are in South America. There are some in Mexico, some in Costa Rica. Uh, Colorado amazingly approved ibogaine, so there'll probably be some ibogaine clinics popping up in Colorado once they figure out what the exact process is. But right now, none in the U.S. I'm sorry, that was ibogaine. Ayahuasca. There are, uh, I think, right now that's just South America, Mexico, and Costa Rica,
I think
and
you may
then
have, there may be a couple places in Southern California and California that have just now been licensed. They were ketamine facilities and have
okay,
now been licensed to be able to do on a case by case basis some ayahuasca, but I might be wrong.
okay. Well, that'd be fantastic.
Mhm.
We're seeing all this movement, and it is hard almost sometimes day to day what's going on. Psilocybin, probably, again, magic mushrooms, as a lot of people call them, probably the most commonly used psychedelic, just because, like I said, they're available so many different ways. And I'm so happy to finally see research on psilocybin, because, again, LSD and psilocybin used recreationally so much that there's sort of a stigma against them, and there shouldn't be, because the science is proving that, just like many of the other psychedelics, they have profound effects. I should say, so ibogaine, we talked about 24 to 36 hours. Ayahuasca is about an 8-hour experience, depending on whether you have a second dose of it during the process. Sometimes people do that. And then psilocybin is magic mushrooms. It's typically about a 4 to 5 hour experience. It's a very inward journey, which I happen to love about that medicine. Um, it will take you inside, and it will help you see what you need to see, and you just have to be prepared to deal with that. And we can talk about preparation down there too. So those are the three. Yeah, those are the three. Well, we could also add mescaline, because San Pedro cactus, and I almost don't want to mention it because it's such a touchy subject, but peyote, which is an indigenous people's sort of substance, but contains mescaline. That's also a natural psychedelic, and those effects are about 8 to 10 hours in length. That's probably the least studied psychedelic medicine right now. I don't know really any research studies with mescaline, but I think there'll be some coming on board with that as well.
And then what is this? What is the chemical that's on the back of a toad?
Bufo. So 5-MeO-DMT, also controversial, because these toads are only grow in a very small region, part of Mexico and Texas, and you don't have to kill the toad to get the venom, which is what they do for this medicine. But uh, because the toads are all over the place, they get run over as the people are chasing them down. This is the shortest psychedelic. It's one that's smoked typically, inhaled, and it happens You smoke, the effect is almost immediate, and it lasts maybe about half an hour. Um, Very profound effects. People say they get shot into space. It's not a typical psychedelic where you see colorful images. For most people, it's almost like seeing nothing. There is nothing. Life is nothing, and then all of a sudden they're shot back into their bodies. Um, but from this process, they see that the world is infinite, and that there's tiny speck in this great world, this great universe.
Got it. And then MDMA.
MDMA, some people know it as ecstasy, which is not really what MDMA is. MDMA is the pure substance. Ecstasy, again, as we've talked about with psilocybin, can sometimes be cut with many other drugs. So the typical party drug you might have gotten in a bar down the road is not MDMA that we're testing. But this medicine is amazingly heart opening. It's in
Wow.
fact, it's a chemical, heart opening.
Got it.
So that and it allow it, and with veterans again, and I'm just speaking with veterans because it's amazing to see this transformation. But with any people, but it allows you to drop your guard. So it allows you just to speak freely about almost anything, and there's no filter. And so it allows you to talk about the trauma in a way that's almost as if you're not engaged. You're just an observer, and you're just discussing. Oh yes, this happened to me. 10 of my buddies died in that explosion, and I see that, and I understand that there's nothing I could do about it. And so it's just this amazing process. It's also used in couples therapy because it's a chance for the couples just to really have a true heart to heart conversation with each other. This medicine is typically also about a 4 hour journey, although a lot of people boost it in the middle of the process with a booster dose, and then it may go to about 8 hours in that process. But yeah, we're seeing so much research in this area. It will probably be the first psychedelic rescheduled by the DEA. Um, Rick Doblin of MAPS, who's done just amazing research with MDMA, expects that the FDA will approve it for therapeutic use in 2024.
Wow. Wow. Well, look, okay. So now, do you talk a lot about this in your book that you've just published? And I want you to tell us a little bit about the book, but the book is called Triumph Over Trauma. Where can people get it first?
Best places are Amazon, Barnes and Noble, any online bookstores. Probably the best bet.
And is there a website for the book itself?
Yes, it's
What is it?
triumphovertraumabook.com.
All right. So now, does Triumph Over Trauma cover what we just talked about?
Yes, the book is sort of in three parts. The first part is an overview of the true psychedelic history, from the early indigenous use to the many wars on drugs, not just in the U.S., but the Spanish government did a war on drugs, the Catholic Church did a war on drugs, and then yes, detailed information about each of these psychedelic medicines, how they're used, how they're best used, what research is being shown to have positive effects, and a little bit about what to me is the geekiest but coolest part of psychedelics, which is this neuroplasticity, which we can get back to in a minute. The second part are 20 stories of healing, spiritual growth, transformation of people that took a different variety of these medicines. So, what I try to do is find as a wide variety as possible. So I have as many from the BIPOC community as I could get. I have more
Well,
women.
can you share a couple of those stories of different? You got
Sure.
20. Share one or two.
Probably the most powerful story in my mind is a story by a woman named Allison, who is the wife of a Navy SEAL. and beautiful on the outside, looks like a beautiful marriage. They had 5 children. Everyone called her husband a hero, patted her on the back, said, "You must be so proud." Uh, um, and while all those things were true, she was already, prior to him becoming a Navy SEAL, was already dealing with some elements of depression and anxiety. And he would be gone from their lives for 3/4 of the year. Most of the time, didn't know where he was, on some mission out of the country, couldn't be told, obviously. And they moved something like 10 or 11 times in 12 years of marriage, just constantly on the go. And she tried to find community with some of the other wives of the Navy SEALs, but they ended up just being sort of what she called kind of bitch sessions, just complaining about, the military in general, or why, they can't get their husbands to do things, et cetera, et cetera. And so she stopped going because it just made her feel worse. And she always had anxiety about getting that knock on the door. Her husband didn't make it. And then she started wanting that knock on the door and have it be over. And then she felt more guilt over that expression, that desire. And she was trying to manage her home. And her husband came home, retired from as a Navy SEAL, and he went and got healing through Ibogaine and came back a changed man. And she said, "I should have been happy. I should have been, oh my God, I have my husband back." Instead, she got even angrier because she was like, "What about me? I've sacrificed my life. I this and that." And uh, he suggested psychedelics. She said, "No, no, I don't believe in drugs." Although, ironically, she was self-medicating with alcohol, and her doctor was giving her Xanax and upping that dosage every time she was saying it wasn't working. Um, and finally, one day, she called her husband. They were moving to Colorado, and she was still on the East Coast. And she said, "If you don't get me help today, I won't be here tomorrow."
Mm.
And she went to a treatment center. She did MDMA and psilocybin. Also interesting that we're now doing some combinations of these psychedelics for healing, which is a fascinating thing to me. And we're just doing the research on this, so this is sort of cutting edge. And then in her story, in her journey, and Allison's story, I have probably read it, talked about it 100 times. You can see how deeply it still affects.
Sure.
It's just so powerful. In her journey, she saw this little girl. And a lot of times in a psychedelic journey, you see a little child, and oftentimes it's you, your little, we call that the inner child. And so she thought, "Oh, it's just me as a little girl." But then, no, it wasn't her. It didn't look like her. And she thought, "Oh, well, maybe it's one of my daughters." Oh, and then the little girl said, Mommy, I'm okay." And she's, "Oh, it must be one of my daughters." But she looked and it wasn't. And it turned out it was, um, she had had an abortion when she was a teenager and had totally pushed it out, blocked it down, had basically forgotten about it, and had had this beautiful life, but obviously had had this guilt ever since that time. And so this little girl said, "I'm fine, don't worry, stop worrying about it." And in this process, she just felt this love that she had never felt for the first time. And this is one of the classic things we hear about psychedelic journeys, that this unconditional love that we never got from our parents or our partners or whomever, and yet they felt it in this experience. And she felt this bliss and this comfort, and she came out of this experience with this hope for the future. And she actually then started this nonprofit called the Hope Project to help other military spouses, which I just love because I love that we focus on the veterans, but those military spouses are dealing with a lot of crap
Absolutely.
also.
And I want to make sure people understand that all the proceeds from your book go to that charity, do they not?
Yes, yes. This was this. I never intended to write a book, and we can talk about that in a second. But yes, the I was sort of told in my process of developing this book that this would be all, the goal, the idea is I just want people to heal. That's my agenda. All the profits are going to these healing nonprofits. I want this to be sort of a win-win-win for everybody. The person reading the book wins because they can then start looking at a way to possibly find healing for themselves or a loved one. It's a win for the greater community because once we heal, we start healing, helping heal others. And then it's a win for these nonprofits because they can get additional funding. Not that books make great a lot of money, but it's at least some revenue that's going to them to continue
Sure.
the healing.
Sure. No, great. So why do you think it took, the rest of the medical world so long to embrace something that they knew worked?
I that's the big question. I know why the politicians went against it, and certainly we know why Richard Nixon did it, but I don't know why the doctors jumped into it. I've seen interviews with researchers back in the 60s who just said, the DEA came in and said, "We pulled your license, you're shut down," and they just took it as, well, that's the end of that, and they didn't fight it, and I was just really shocked by that because and then medical doctors, happily, we are seeing some therapists that are right behind here pushing for this healing of psychedelics being reclassified as a therapy for their practices. So I think we're seeing that, but I don't know uh, why the medical community is that way. Except again, if you want to follow that, all the money there. Uh, the thing that got me into the wellness also, Montel, that we're talking about, kind of go back to the beginning, is I had a primary care doctor 20 years ago. And I'd been to him multiple times for an annual wellness checkup. And this one time he said, the first thing he said to me was not, "Hi, how you doing?" or "Hey, I haven't seen you in a year. What's going on?" He said, "What prescriptions can I get you today?" And that's when I knew the world had kind of changed, and that's where we are today, where doctors are like, "Yeah, what prescription do you need?" Rather than, "How can we heal you? What's the healing modality that will work for you?"
And that's bizarre. Yeah, the world had changed when a doctor would say that, but what do you think? He was willing to write you a prescription for anything else that we've now figured out doesn't necessarily work that well, but
Yeah.
wasn't willing to embrace what we know works. What do you think turned the corner?
I look at medical schools, and you've probably seen this too, Montel, where nutrition, which used to play such a big role in medicine and in our health, I think doctors get, a couple hours on nutrition and the power of food as medicine. And so I think we've just turned to this model. If you look at the everything is a disorder now, and there's a pill for everything. And I just feel like we're medical school is, well, I think Western medicine is amazing for emergency, for surgery, for so many things. It just doesn't get mental health. Uh, even from back in the days where we had the hospitals, similar to what was in One Flew in the Cuckoo's Nest and other things, we just haven't gotten it, and we lock up people rather than find treatment for them. And
Or we kill them. I don't know if you heard about a story
well,
that happened
yeah,
recently in New York on a subway. There's a guy who's mentally ill, and we applaud a person for killing them. This is like, I'm going to kill you. I have a right to kill you because you scream. I have a right to kill you because you annoyed me. Stop it. I just do not
yeah.
understand this mentality of hate that we have that's so pervasive right now. And I think that when if some of these people who hate it so badly were to utilize psychedelics, they might recognize that the world's a little different than they thought it was.
I 100% agree. You mentioned earlier, and someone said to me a couple weeks ago when I was chatting with them that he thought the world was in a depression. And I think that's kind of an interesting metaphor because, as you said, there's so much hate, and I agree. It's sad. It's frightening. It makes
You,
me
you know,
angry.
well, I'm angry too because I don't want to believe what a small segment of the society is trying to make me believe.
Yeah.
And you live in a world, I live in a world where I try to look at everything not half full, but close to full. Ain't nothing bad unless we make it bad.
Yeah.
However, we have a group that's on the rise demographically worldwide that wants to fight against man's own humanity to man, that is sick of, it's almost like evolution has stopped in certain groups and demographics. We no longer want to evolve. We just want to be able to result back to our Neanderthal days, and try to fix things with brute force. That's the reason why we look at, see, I have a little different take on even what's going on in America. Every time there's a shooting, somebody says, well, see, there's mental illness. Bullshit. It ain't just mental illness. It's a fact that there are so many people who have pressed so hard in the last 20 years to take the filters off,
yep.
To think that filters were bad, to think that the evolving to understand our kinship or our fellowship with others has evolved into making sure we can determine our differences in others. And so we're living in a time where, I even look at on a daily basis. I mean, I turn on the television. There was another mass shooting yesterday. There's another mass shooting. And again, I say this thing about the fact that America has very little to be proud of being number one at, especially when it comes to the fact that we have, close to 200 people a day are shot, and 120 of them, I think, die every single day. And out of that 120, I think the number is around 15 of them are kids, making it the biggest cause of death in America for children now. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
So, yeah. And then we look at the way the pharmaceutical industry approaches mankind, and we're nothing more than, a checkbook for them. Yep. We're nothing more than, a monetary solution. That's the reason why we advertise so hard. I go out here right now, I turn on the television in between my sessions, and I'll bet you in 30 minutes, I will see at least 5 ads for some form of pharmaceutical that's bullshit, that causes more problems than the pharmaceutical seems to solve. So anyway, I got to get off. I got to get off my. Look, we're running out of time, my friend.
Well, I know, but can I just say one thing just to follow up on what you said? Because I know we're running out of time. But what one veteran told me after psychedelics, and healing, he said, just what you kind of echoing what you said. He said, if everyone took psychedelics, there'd be no war, because when you realize that we're all brothers and sisters in this great consciousness, it changes. How do you shoot your own brother? How do you shoot your own sister? And so I think part of solving this hate and fear and anger is healing. It might not necessarily just be psychedelics or other modalities of healing, but I think that there's trauma fueled by this hate, as you're talking about, this hateful voices, and it escalates that trauma even more. And so there are two parts. I think there's 2 prongs. Yeah, we need to get rid of that hate somehow, but the healing will help that person say, I don't need that hate speech anymore, because I realize that there is love, there is life, there is hope. Healing allows you to uncover your true self.
Sure. It would be amazing if we could somehow slip, microdoses of something like psilocybin into every water source in the world so that everybody got a little micro dose and wake up in the
Yeah.
morning not giving a shit about somebody else's problem, but digging inside of themselves. Look, one
Yes.
more time,
Yes.
let me just make sure our viewers know the book is called Triumph Over Trauma. Psychedelic Medicines are helping people heal their trauma, change their lives, and grow their spirituality. That book is out. It is a guide for for the psychedelic curious, and it's by Dr. Ran Hansen. Dr. Hansen, look, I got to tell you, my friend, I'm so sad that we've run out of time,
Yeah.
but I want to have you back. So
I'd love that.
please, I'll have Mel reach out to you, and let's figure out a way that we can continue this conversation, because I
Yeah.
think there's so many people so interested in the idea. They've been fed a lot of false information. This is
Yeah.
not a party drug. This is not
No.
something for you to think, okay, yeah, I'm gonna go have a trip and then get with my friends and get my groove on. No, 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 no.
Yeah.
This is something to actually, I like the idea of resetting, not just this planet, but this is a way to reset yourself.
Yes.
And we do understand that psychedelics have profound effect, not just psychologically, but physically, because it does actually change the molecular structure of the amygdala and several other areas, the pons area of the brain.
Yep.
So we know its effects. And when you were talking about it, it provides for neuroplasticity. This is what the doc is really talking about. We've seen that people who have come out of psychedelic experiences have experienced some form of neuroplasticity at the same time. So again, I go back to, if you think that Albert Einstein was the greatest mind of the last century, he was really a foreteller of this, because he was trying to tell you that for every action is equal and opposite reaction. And for those of you who don't know, Albert Einstein used to smoke a little cannabis every now and then. So might have been something there.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir, for being a part.
Thank you. Thank you
No,
very much,
What,
Montel.
you going to say?
Oh, I was going to say, and cannabis is a master plant, so much healing there as well. So all these plants do tremendous things for us.
One more time, I want you to do the shameless plug. Go ahead. Where can they go to get more information?
triumphovertraumabook.com, and they can find me on LinkedIn if they want to connect with me there.
Okay, my friend. Well, thank you so much. I want to reconnect with you, so let's do it sometime soon, okay?
Wonderful.
All right.
I'd love it.
You be
Thank
well,
you,
sir. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye.
Thanks for joining me on Let's Be Blunt with Montel. Please make sure you're subscribed and hit the bell to be notified when new episodes post each week. We'd love to hear your feedback also, so please send us your comments.